Welcome to this week's Think With Me Thursday. Welcome if you're joining on YouTube, if you're coming at us from LinkedIn or from Twitter. Glad to have you here on the stream today. To give you a quick rundown of what we're going to take a look at in the next hour or so of the stream. First off, I want to talk a little bit about some ideas that I have for the future of effective remote work and what that looks like for this YouTube channel, as well as for the broader idea of effective remote work and the types of things that we're covering and working with around here. After that, I want to share some thoughts that I have around productivity systems. There's an interesting metaphor that I've come up with recently that is kind of helping me think through tackling different types of problems with productivity. So if you're interested in that, be sure to stick around. And then lastly, we're going to get into 4 articles today about time management. There was an excellent point early on in the chat. I'm not sure if you can scroll back to see it from Arya, who was waiting to join the stream today, about can you actually manage time? And so I think that'll be an interesting thought to cover in that, because I do have some thoughts about that. I just kind of a little bit of a preview is that I think you can't manage time itself. You can use time, you can invest time, you can spend time, but you can't necessarily manage it, so to say, very well. But I think broadly, time management is a term that we put on how we can successfully use our time in the most impactful way. So it's a little bit of a word thing in some regards when it comes to that, but we can talk about that a little bit more once we get to that segment. If you're just joining the stream, we'll be getting going on our rundown for the day in just a couple of minutes. But do let me know in the chat where you're signing in from, what you're working on. This is a Think With Me Thursday, and so if you've never been with us before, the idea here is that we're just kind of doing some personal knowledge management stuff. Plus, I'm talking about some other things as well that are relevant to the channel and relevant to personal knowledge management as well. But largely, we're spending time digging into articles, looking at things, exploring ideas together, seeing how these ideas fit together, largely to give those watching, to give you a picture of how I do PKM related things, and maybe there's some ideas that you can take from what I do and implement it into your own workflows. Got the GoPro set up today, ready to go. Not really doing anything crazy with this over here, just have another camera angle for the streams, but hopefully you all are enjoying being where you are at right now. I know, as I mentioned last week, the weather where I'm at has been getting quite nice. I've actually been able to go for walks outside, which is great. It's been kind of a cold winter where I live, and so getting outside has not been the most pleasant thing in the world. And I'm gearing up right now for a bunch of travel. I've got a trip with my family coming up soon and a trip for work coming up soon, which is just kind of wild to think about in relation to the last couple of years. It seems like the world is starting to open up a little bit again, but it's kind of cautiously optimistic about those kinds of things. But we're going to get started here in just a second. Be sure to let me know where you're coming from in the chat. If you have any questions too about PKM, do leave them in the chat, or questions or comments about anything that we're talking about. Love to hear from you. If you're watching this on LinkedIn or on Twitter, do reply there. Unfortunately, the platform that I use on Restream, I think I can get comments from LinkedIn here, but I don't see them. I can't reply back via text. So unfortunately, there's an issue there. And on Twitter, I don't get any back and forth at all. So if you have any questions or anything you want to say on those platforms, do leave a comment there, and I'll check on those and reply when I'm able to if I don't get a chance to address it on the stream. But with that, let's get started for today. I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about what I think the future of effective remote work is. I've been toying with these ideas for probably the last month and a half. I mean, if I really were to get real with it, I've been thinking about what does effective remote work look like for the last probably 4, even 6 months. Kind of started when I took a break starting last summer, when I was dealing with a bit of burnout and just had to put all content production, everything extra in my life kind of on hold just so I could recover from that. But at the end of last year, I was like, you know what? I'm ready to move back into doing this, and I've really loved digging in further with effective remote work. And so I think I'm in a good spot to try to figure out where effective remote work is heading next. And one of the big things that I'm thinking about is doing a bit of rebranding. So we've been effective remote work since 2019. It was kind of a bet that I had made that people who were remote workers might care about productivity, might care about knowledge management, might care about some of the things that I care about as a remote worker. That led me eventually to start a podcast and this YouTube channel. And what's really interesting about that is the YouTube channel took off in relation to the note-taking and personal knowledge management space with Rome Research's rise and then Obsidian, which was one of the first early applications that I covered. And it stuck with me, which was a good fit. And I've continued to pump out content about Obsidian over the last couple of years with that. One of the big changes that I'm looking at, though, with the rebrand is to try to figure out how I can still talk about productivity. I can still talk about remote work in relation to that. I can still talk about PKM, but where it makes sense, where you're getting the resources that you're expecting, where you're expecting them. So here on the YouTube channel, if you don't know anything about how the YouTube algorithm works, it's a little tricky that once people subscribe to your channel expecting one thing and you start serving them other types of videos, they're not going to engage with them, and then YouTube starts to serve your videos less overall. And I've started to notice that because I've tried to branch out my YouTube channel for the last couple months. If you haven't noticed that, I've started to notice that tank happen in some of those videos where the Obsidian content and PKM content that I produce does really well, but anything else is just like, nah, don't really want that. And that makes sense because I know a lot of you who have subscribed have signed up to get content about Obsidian and personal knowledge management, not necessarily things about remote work or productivity or anything like that. So one of the rebranding efforts that I'm probably going to undertake here in the next couple of weeks is to hone the focus of this YouTube channel in the personal knowledge management space. So we'll talk about apps in that regard. Obsidian obviously is a huge one for me, looking at workflows there, big picture ideas of personal knowledge management. I've got a refresh of the Obsidian Made Simple course coming up here in the next couple of months. We're going to do kind of a V2 launch of it. Francesco and I have been planning that out. And so that's cool. I'm really glad to have some of these things on the table. And I think being able to refresh the channel and kind of push it in a more niche direction than I have been is a good thing. I think that's really important to do. And so that opens up a lot of opportunity for that. But more broadly speaking, the rebrand, I think, is largely going to move forward with me changing the name of my business from Effective Remote Work to Effective. So then that opens up avenues as well, so that if I want to create other resources for remote work or productivity or PKM or anything else in the realm of leadership, knowledge management, things of that sort, down the road, not right away, but down the road, because those are all things that I'm passionate about. It can all fit underneath this brand of Effective. And so this YouTube channel might become something like Effective PKM. So it's just kind of honed in on that one thing. And so I'm kind of excited to go down that road. And so there'll be some changes with that coming up, but you can expect more of the same from the YouTube channel, just maybe a different name, a different logo, a different website that we have. And that's really kind of where I'm taking that. I'm seeing a couple comments in the chat here. Arya is from the Kurdistan region in Iraq. And it's nice here around this time. We have a cultural event called Nuraz, forgive me if I mispronounce that, which translates to New Day from Kurdish. We go to a lot of picnics. That sounds like a wonderful time. I hope you're really enjoying that time. Santiago says, I love your channel. Seeing me from Colombia. One question, in addition to Obsidian and Notion, have you used the Zettelkasten method? What do you think of other methods? Thanks. I'll do a brief bit on this, and if we can come back to this more toward the end of the stream, I will, but I have used the Zettelkasten method a bit. I haven't been a big user of systems that have a much more rigid approach to things. Getting things done is one of those. Zettelkasten is another. It's a really great way to handle information in your workload, but the challenge that I have with it is just the rigidity of the principles and the ideas. I'm one who likes a little bit more fluidity and flexibility. Sometimes I'll tackle problems in a different way one time just because it just makes sense to me to do that at that moment in time. But Zettelkasten has influenced a lot of the principles that I have implemented inside of the way that I use Obsidian for knowledge management. So while I'm not a strict follower of the Zettelkasten method, I do believe that it's something that has greatly influenced how I approach taking notes and how I think about connecting ideas together, breaking ideas down to atomic concepts, and trying to just whittle away at things so that they make further and further sense to me. So anyway, as far as effective remote work or effective goes, that's really kind of where I'm planning on taking things. I'm really excited for this. If you have any feedback on this too, do leave a comment or a message in the chat. Let me know what you're thinking about it. I would love to hear. But again, you can expect more of the same from effective remote work here on YouTube. If you're looking for Obsidian stuff, this is the place to land. The other thing I want to talk about today is something to do with productivity systems. I know this has been something that I've been working through a lot myself lately because my systems, I mean, honestly, in a lot of ways, have had a lot of flux for the last few years. I haven't really found something that works for me. I've found like bits and pieces of things that work, but I haven't found something that just holistically works for me. Some of this has been due to the fact that I need to have a big picture view in addition to a granular day view. Arya, thanks. I'm planning on doing that here within the next couple of weeks. Just I've got a lot of things to sort out and logistically speaking to make that happen. So, but appreciate that. We're gonna move forward on it. But anyway, on the productivity side of things, some of the challenges I've had with productivity has been related to needing to have a big picture perspective on what's on my plate, but also manage the little details. There are times where I find working on paper to just be refreshing and more effective for me, but then there are other times where that just doesn't work and it gets to be a little bit too frictiony for me to be able to use that, so I need to use some kind of a digital tool. And if you've followed my journey at all, if you've listened to my podcast in the past, which is on hold for the moment, I may continue that at some point in the future, but we'll see. It just matters how much time I get on my plate to be able to handle that. But if you followed my journey at all, you know that I've used just about every tool under the sun for productivity. I've used OmniFocus, Things, Todoist, Notion, the bullet journal, paper, everything else. Basically, I've tried a lot of it. I've started trying more of like the project management style applications these days too. Thinking ClickUp, Asana, different pieces of that sort, just because I'm finding that I need a way to roll little granular tasks up into bigger projects and into bigger goals. Todoist and other apps don't really do this super well, in my opinion. You don't really have a way to directly connect. If you say have a 1 year objective, like this year I'm aiming to do X, and then these 3 or 4 projects that will spawn out of that eventually. There's not really an easy way to connect those together, so I can, just say from a top level perspective, see, okay, I want to work on this objective right now. What do I have in progress, or what do I need to work on in that area so I can move that goal forward? Because to me, it's not just about projects. It's the challenge that I think a lot of productivity software is built around the getting things done methodology, whether they realize it or not. Everything is at the granular level a task, and then tasks are just added to things. And to me, like, I tend to see things upside down in a lot of ways more naturally, where I don't see individual tasks, though I do need to see those here and there. I need a way to manage that. But I see it as, here's the direction that I'm going. What are the actions that I need to take to get there? And a lot of times those are bigger picture actions. Like, I need to build this thing, or I need to implement this tool, or I need to do these things. And then those spawn individual actions. And so this has been a challenge that I've been struggling through with productivity systems and thinking lately. One metaphor that's been coming to mind lately, though, has been this idea of the river and the tower. So the river is the place where stuff kind of comes to you. It's where you get exposed to the needs of others. It's kind of the place where it's just the funnel of things that are in your life that happen, that come by, that come from the outside. They are just the natural flow of life. These are things that you may or may not need to handle. There's priorities that you need to sort out in there. There's things that come out of that you need to do some intentional work on. But in large part, it's the place where the flow of it is largely out of your control, but it's where you need to handle certain things outside of the realm of you, I guess, in some way. And then the tower is really what you're intentionally building. So if you have an objective that you're chasing, what are the building blocks so that you can build that objective or chase that goal or achieve that vision that you have, and how you're intentionally advancing that? The thing that's different about this relation to other perspectives that I have had is that I see this as enveloping the holistic picture of life. A lot of people think about productivity just in terms of work, but I tend to think about it in terms of my whole picture of my life. So it's with my family, it's with my wife, it's with my household, it's with my health, my relationships, as well as the things that I'm doing at work and in effective remote work. So that's an interesting thing with it, because sometimes, like, you might be working on the tower, and you're investing in a project for work where you're doing something intentional to reach an objective for work. But it also might be you're just sitting and being intentional to play with your kids for a half an hour a day or something of that sort, because you have an objective in mind that you want to invest in your relationship with your kids. So it doesn't have to look like work. Hey, thanks for that. I appreciate having you on this stream. Yakov, is that how you pronounce your name? I've seen your name spelled a number of different ways, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name. But I know you've been a staple around the community here, so I appreciate you jumping on the stream today. But anyway, it's one of those things where I've been wrestling with productivity overall, and how to put all the pieces together. And then there's also the whole duality of, do you have a one size fits all system for everything, or do you section it off and have different systems for different parts of your life? So do I have a different system for effective remote work from my personal life? Do I segment those, or do I put it all in one place so that I have an all-encompassing dashboard for those? I don't really know the answer. I know one thing that I've been trying to experiment with lately is using different tools for this. I'm trying Trello, I'm trying Notion, and I mentioned that I've been looking at like ClickUp and Asana and things of that sort too. Those may be a little bit too complex and team-oriented for my productivity thoughts right now. But anyway, that's kind of the big picture of like where I'm wrestling right now with productivity. I really don't know where to take things next, because there's such a mix of things that work well for me, and I haven't quite figured out yet how to fit all the pieces together. One thing that has been working so far is that I know Oliver Berkman, who wrote the recent book 4,000 Weeks, just sent out an email newsletter, this idea of how he manages his days, which is what he calls the 3-3-3 method. So you start off with 3 hours of deep work, then 3 tasks, then 3 maintenance tasks. The maintenance tasks are things that they're for upkeep in your life. So for him, I know he talked about a maintenance task would be writing his morning pages, going for a 45-minute walk outside. For me, this varies day to day what that maintenance looks like. But like, for example, today, this looks like getting outside to go for a walk, spending a little bit of chill time, writing a little bit just for my own personal benefit, and one other thing. Aria says here, I get you. I'm also struggling with that. I wonder how the people back then did all the work they did. Like Avicenna was a polymath and wrote the canon of medicine and other books. Right. That's really kind of an interesting thing. Part of it is I wonder if it's just that we live in a different culture today. We're so much more hyper connected. Whereas back then, like, you had to, if you were going to do research, you either had to be in front of people to do that research, or you had to like go somewhere where that research was compiled to either get that research or that had to come to you. You didn't have access to basically the entire world from a computer. It's so wild to think that these prolific thinkers did what they did then. But I think what's tripping a lot of us up is the fact that there's so many fast-moving pieces to the world today. And that's kind of what also fits into this idea of the river, this metaphor. Like, these are all the river is the fast-moving stuff. Whereas the tower is the place where you're intentionally and methodically moving forward to build something. I think in today's day, I think you have to approach both of them in some way, shape, or form. Like, you can't just ignore the river and be okay, and you can't just ignore the tower and be okay. You have to handle both of them. I think, like, in the olden days, even in the days of like Newton or even up to like Einstein, the river was so much smaller because we didn't have these things in our hands all day long. We didn't have computers with the internet. We didn't have social networks. In fact, I mean, they didn't even really have telephone calls. You had to write letters to people, or you had to be in their physical presence a lot of times to communicate with them. And so, but now, like, we have these fire hoses of information that we have to deal with, or that we have, and we have to know how to deal with them. And I think what's interesting about this idea of the river and the tower that I've been playing with is that some people, it interfaces really well with the idea of makers and managers. So like, makers would be more heavily emphasized than building the tower, where managers would be more heavily emphasized on handling the river. It's just kind of how it works. But it's not a direct correlation with that. Because again, it comes to a whole life experience. It's not just about work. Well, I think maker and manager is a really good fit for work, but it's really hard to say I'm a maker at home, with my kids when I want to invest in having time with them. Just the ideas don't really translate there very well, but it does interface pretty well with that idea. So I think what we're starting to see is there's a lot of dialogue around what does it look like to kind of shift the balance away from everybody needs to focus on the river to everybody needs to focus on the tower. That's where you hear Cal Newport talking a lot lately, about his concept of the deep life and deep work. If you read any of his literature at all, he tends to focus largely on that. We need to minimize what he calls the hyperactive hive mind in the workplace, these fast-paced messaging that throws people off and just bounces work back and forth. But the trick is, well, we can minimize that all we want, but if we're not investing in the right places, then we're having kind of an issue. Plus, I don't think we're fully, like, now that culture has gone in this direction, unless something drastically changes, I don't think we're going to fully eliminate the fact that this place exists. The hyperactive hive mind, the river, whatever you want to call it. So anyway, there's a lot of challenges with handling productivity these days. I know Newport would make the case that we've put too much onus on the individual workers to handle productivity, and that should then be put on organizations. And there's a level of that, I think, that is true. It would be pretty helpful if organizations were able to structure project management and structure work so that it really was just big picture tasks delegated out to people, and they didn't have to worry about, handling all sorts of interstitial communication and things like that between groups. But when you break productivity down, and this was another thing that I was thinking about the other day, when you break productivity down to like some of the first principles of it, you have people and you have deliverables, things that are being done. And if it was all about things being done, then we wouldn't have this tension. It would just be go do the thing, and then it's okay. I think that's part of the reason why there's been such a push towards almost solitary kind of work. Academic style of work, solitary, deep dives into specific subject areas, because it removes the challenge of people from it, because people are the biggest blocker towards staying productive and being impactful. But the other side of the coin, then, if we look at the first principles of people, is that in many ways you can't do things alone. There's so many things that you have to coordinate with people. You have to communicate with them. You have to collaborate with others in order to go the direction that you want to go. There's that proverb that says that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go with others. It's kind of the balance of that. Like, you can really build yourself up successfully by yourself if you want to. I think there's also the reason why we see a lot of solopreneurships starting, because it's really easy to go fast. You don't have to manage anybody. You don't have to deal with the logistics and the challenges that come with having a team. You don't have to deal with the bureaucracy that comes with having to manage taxes and payroll and things like that, and leadership challenges that come too. But on the flip side, if you want to stay around for a long time, then you have to bring other people into the mix. And so this is, I think, kind of the core of the challenge of the productivity discourse these days, is that there's this push and pull of, like, we want less people. Like, we want less people involved with it. Let me just handle it, because then I can dig in deep and be more productive and be more successful. But then on the other side of it, you can't really go very far without people, with all the challenges that brings. And this kind of highlights the idea too that what I heard, who was it? It was on the Manager Tools podcast. I can't remember the guy's name on there, the host on there, but I remember him saying this a few years back, that the greatest accomplishment of the 20th century is the company, the organization, largely just because we figured out as people how to work together to build something, because everybody tends to be self-interested in some regards. Aria says, what I like about Cal Newport is that alongside being a content creator and writer, He's also researching and working in computer science. The same is true for Lex Fridman. Yeah, I think that's pretty neat too. I mean, it's very clear that Newport is one of the prolific people of our age, just because he's been able to find that place of hyper focus on what matters to him, which I think is really, really helpful. I think the big challenge is, though, is does that thought process and does the way he work extrapolate to other people? I've tried to work similarly to how he works, and it doesn't work for me. Maybe I'm just an outlier and it should work for everybody else, but I can really only focus on deep work for about 3 hours a day, rather. If I go too much further than that, then I'm pushing myself a little too hard. And then to like do the hyper time blocking my whole day like that, it doesn't really work for me. In fact, it tends to stress me out quite a bit. So that's kind of interesting. Like there's so many good ideas in the productivity world today, though. I just think we're at a place where at the big picture level, the challenge is, where do we find the balance between getting stuff done and working with people? I think that's where the tension that exists in the productivity world is right now. And then on the individual level, it's how do I handle my day to be the most effective, but also how do I handle the big picture? That's the tension that I've been feeling lately is I have the big picture. I need to see the big picture in a way that's meaningful, but I also need to be able to know where I need to take my day in order to advance the big picture and also maintain the rest of my life. And there's a tension in the midst of that, because we want to have everything all organized and nice over here, but then we also want to do everything over here in the day. And it's just, there's tension in the midst of all of it. However, if there's one thing that I know, it's that tension often produces what we're looking for. We'll find, if we stick in the tension, we'll find what we're looking for, is kind of the gist that I'm trying to get at there. But with that, let's do some PKM. Been talking enough here lately. But anyway, that's kind of just where I've been wrestling with productivity. I think it's important to wrestle with ideas and try to remix things. I think that's, if there's anything that we can take out of kind of this renewed interest in note-taking and PKM in general, is wrestle with ideas, wonder, ask questions, experiment, see how things fit together or don't fit together. And don't be afraid to look at the big picture too. It's really easy to get lost in the weeds of the details and then forget to see the big picture patterns that emerge, or to cross-apply ideas between different realms that you're thinking in. Because one wouldn't necessarily always think that productivity and leadership and personal knowledge management and all the things that I tend to think about are interrelated, but it's been really interesting that as I have built out a knowledge management system, that I've seen more and more that a lot of this is interconnected in many interesting ways. So yeah, but first article we have today, again, if you're just joining with us, we're digging into some time management today. The articles are in the description on YouTube. The first one we're looking at is from thesystemsthinker.com, Managing Your Time as a Leader. This is a long, kind of dense article, so I might do some skim reading today on this one. But we're going to dive into, I've been interested in this time management, the idea of it. Again, hitting on what Arya was talking about prior to the live stream. The question is, can you actually manage time? And I would think probably not. I mean, you can't change time. You can't manage time. But you can either embrace time or fight against time. That's kind of what I tend to think about things. When we talk about time management, it's more about how we're investing or spending our time. I like to use the metaphor of invest and spend when it comes to management of time or energy or what it is. Just because the way I think about investment and spending is like this. Investment is something that you're intentionally putting something into, whether it's money or time or attention, and you're seeking to get something out of it. Spending is maybe thoughtlessly putting your money, time, or attention somewhere without care of where it's going. And so we can either spend or invest our time. When I talk about time management as a concept, and when I think when other people talk about time management as a concept, it's about how do you invest your time correctly in a way that is helpful, to where you're not just getting spun around into all the whirlwind of the day, but that you're actually making effective choices as a person, as a leader, as a content creator, as whatever realm of the world that you're living and thinking in. But yeah, I would agree. And then the other thing too is that oftentimes we tend to fight time. We tend to see time as something that is working against us. But something that I have been learning to embrace more and more is that time is my friend. That time is a good thing. It helps me to clarify what my objectives are. It helps me to clarify what my most important things are. And instead of fighting against time, like, I don't have enough time to do these things, if I embrace the time that I do have and try to focus on the thing that's the most impactful in the time that I do have, then it becomes a heck of a lot easier to manage myself. Because I guess we're not managing time, are we? We're managing ourselves, right? That's what this all comes down to. Anyway, let's dive in and do some reading. I'm gonna zoom in here real quick. I think that's interesting. Here's another burnout relation. That's been a recurring theme that I've been seeing a lot in regards to productivity and work these days is burnout. That's a huge concern that a lot of people have. Working people are expected to run at a fast pace and be highly productive, yet at the same time, there is a chronic sense of individual and collective slippage, less than optimal work performance, and impending burnout. Especially for folks who are higher up the chain in organizations, I think that's relatively true. That's really interesting. Recent studies confirm that under stress, people act more defensively, making poorer decisions and literally lose the executive function of their minds. This is especially costly for leaders because they set the tone for their organizations. Conventional approaches to time management are useful in organizing to get work done. Yeah, that's kind of what we were just talking about a little bit. However, increasing personal efficiency alone is inadequate for helping leaders resolve this key strategic issue: how to achieve high levels of sustainable long-term performance while meeting the challenge of doing more with less. Powerful workplace dynamics lead people, individually and collectively, to spend large amounts of their work time pursuing non-productive activities. Leaders must understand the nature of these dynamics and what they can do to change individual and collective habits of action. Yeah, so one of the things with strategy that's really interesting, because being a productive person, I think, has a lot to do with your tactical execution of things, but I think the more that I've been understanding it, probably 75% of productivity, long-term sustainable productivity, is at the strategic level. Positioning yourself to work on the highest impact things while at the same time putting to the side or prioritizing the items that are less important. Because there's this idea of like, you have a vision. This is kind of the big picture of where you want to go or where you want to be. Then you have the strategic level, which is how are you going to get there? And then the tactical level at the bottom, which is what are the actions that you're going to take? What are the tactics that you're going to undergo? A lot of personal productivity and time management, as this talks about here, conventional approaches to time management. A lot of that is centered around the tactical level. Getting things done is largely centered around the tactical level. How do you handle information on a day-to-day basis? The challenge is, I think a lot of us, and myself included, struggle to get out of the tactical level and see the strategic level. This is where I've been really wanting a bigger picture productivity system, or a way that I can tie the strategic level to the tactical level. Because that at the strategic level, that's where you can identify what those high leverage actions are, so that you're spending your time, you're investing your time the most wisely. I just think this comment on overwork is really crucial here. People tend to work more. But just like with everything, there's the law of diminishing returns that kicks in. You might be able to get more done, but how quality is that work, as it talks about here? Sustainable productivity then means getting the right things done well in a timely way, preserving and restoring resources, including oneself, one's good standing with colleagues and customers, and one's relationship with family, community, and the natural environment. Okay, this is similar to what I've been talking about in terms of holistic productivity. I like their term calling this sustainable productivity, because that's really what it is. I think the challenge is, though, like, we still see productivity in terms of work, and we still see this duality of life and work. And that's something that I have been trying to change in my own mind, and have been talking about a lot lately too, is it's not just work and life. It's the holistic picture of work and life. So this is something that I find interesting, this concept that they have here, phantom workload. Phantom workload is the unintentional work created when people either take expedient but ineffective shortcuts, or avoid taking on such essential difficult tasks as clarifying mission, vision, and values, asking questions that challenge what is ambiguous or unrealistic, identifying and resolving conflicts, clarifying and streamlining decision-making processes, providing candid, constructive feedback, differentiating people with sanctions and rewards, launching innovative projects, making decisions that require disinvestment in programs or projects. Yeah, okay. So the way that I'm reading this is phantom work is stuff that Like when you shortcut stuff and you just don't do a good job, then that's phantom work, or if it creates a phantom workload. Or if you don't get above the day-to-day and get to the strategic level of handling the big picture, the direction of things, then you're creating extra work for yourself. I'm going to highlight this image here. I think this is really, really interesting. Let's see if I can. There we go. So I think this table is really, really interesting here, actually. Managing time in 4 domains. So there's the guiding level, strategizing, relating, and doing. This article is a heck of a lot better than I was thinking it was when I saved it the other night. So this is really good. I'm excited to read this because it fits directly into what we've been talking about today, with the tension between people and getting stuff done being kind of the main tension in productivity. If we're only going to think about productivity on the individual level, then of course we should try to minimize interaction with other people as much as possible, because then we can invest in what we think is the most important to do. But that's not really how life works, unfortunately. As individualistic as we can be here in Western society, it's not really how the world operates, unfortunately. So under this guiding column, the domain is what they would call spiritual. Function is to mobilize commitment through aspiration. Primary tasks are to know what you really care about, establishing a meaningful purpose, and clarifying your unique contributions. Strategizing is in the mental domain. It's the place to think strategically. Defining limited goals, managing trade-offs, making accurate time estimates are your primary tasks. Relating is emotional. You're building relationships and community here. You're making commitments. You're managing productive meetings. You're managing your energy well. Then doing is the material. It's where you organize for action. Sorting and filing information, tracking commitments, managing emails. This is where your traditional productivity systems would come in. The rest of this, though, we don't really talk about too much in productivity. We just kind of be a little bit more aspirational about things, with things. Arya says, one thing I will say is that there is a theory of everything in science, like set theory in math or string theory of physics. I don't think anyone is working on it for productivity. Yeah, that's kind of what I think I've been trending in that direction, is trying to figure out how it all fits together. I don't know if I would call it a theory of everything for productivity, but it's probably more in the world of business, I guess, than just productivity, because productivity is a subset of that. But it's also what I would call life management too, if you're going to talk about it on the individual level. It's really this tension between, like, where does the individual go and how it goes, like, where does the individual fit in the broader context of organizations and community, and how do they interface together? Arya says, I wanted to work on it called Sequence. Basically, it was all about ordering the elements, tasks, and projects to get things done, inspired by production line. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's similar to what Newport talks about in his book, A World Without Email, is encouraging companies to develop more of a thought process like that instead of leaving it up to individuals. And that makes a lot of sense too. And there's a lot of companies who already operate like that, which is pretty neat. It's just maybe not quite as intentionally as Newport is advocating for. I'm going to link this to Essentialism here by Greg McKeown, just because this directly fits into that context and that idea. People who don't have enough time to get things done often find themselves in reactive mode. In a world where there is always too much to do, their lack of clear personal purpose leaves them vulnerable to trying to do it all. As a result, they are often unfocused and confused. Yes, I can relate to that myself sometimes. This is good. I think this is really, really good here. Clarifying the unique contribution you want to make enables you to set a limited number of goals. Purposeful managers tend to work toward 1 to 3 goals at a time and discipline their direct reports to do the same. It kind of goes to that whole idea of, what is it? Oh, that I think it's the Chinese proverb that says, if you know, the man who tries to catch 2 rabbits catches none. We hear that a lot, but limiting the amount of in-progress work that you have is an idea that Personal Kanban has implemented, but I think even then it's still a little bit at the tactical level. I've started to do this myself by limiting the number of goals that I'm working on. And I used to hate goals, but now that I'm starting to see how I can tie goals and projects and things that I'm moving on. Oh, it might be Russian. I don't know. I've heard it multiple different places, so if I got it wrong, sorry. But I've been trying to do this a bit at the goal level, like trying to limit it down to, okay, I'm chasing these objectives. These are the ones that I need to be concerned with. So anything relating to them automatically goes to the top of my priority list. Sometimes there are things that are a little bit more urgent that creep in, but these are defined as strategically important to me or the work that I'm doing. And when I can focus on those the most, I feel the most accomplished at the end of the day, even if I only get a little bit further on them. When I focus on these things that are connected to my bigger picture idea of where I'm going, I feel like I'm making progress. So that's a good thing. I'm starting to skim because I've spent a long time on this article. I'm not a huge fan of SMART goals, though, to be honest. I think having such like rubriced goals is challenging for some circumstances. Obviously, in some cases, if you're in charge of the growth of a company, or if you're in charge of a sales target, having metrics to measure your goals by is good. Other times, it's more important, I think, to focus on like the big idea, the result that you want to seek, and maybe the lead actions or lead metrics that will signify, or the lead actions that will result in the lagging metrics that you're looking for. So a lead action, say for example, we'll take this for example. Say you want to increase the number of products that you sell at your business. The lagging metric that you're looking at increasing is the number of products sold, revenue generated, things of that sort. The lead measures or the lead actions that you would take are engaging in more sales, refining your marketing funnel, and digging into those specific pieces. So I think limiting goals to SMART goals is restrictive in some circumstances. I like this idea of having a target, a place that you're looking to put effort with an outcome that you can measure where there's progress made. Not necessarily we're going to try to increase our sales by 40% this year. That might be an aspiration, which is not bad to have. You can definitely shoot for aspirations like that. I'm personally more of a person who likes to say, I want to increase my sales for the year, just as a random example. Yeah, I guess OKRs is similar to it. I haven't dug too deep into OKRs, but that's kind of the idea. So this section might be interesting here. I think it's funny that there's such a focus in this section on paper. So I like this idea here too. It's kind of this cyclical approach. I think cycles often make a lot of sense when it comes to business, when it comes to personal development, things of that sort, because you're never just at an end point in life. Things don't just often end in life. There's always another layer you can go and always another level you can rise to. So I like this, where it goes from know your purpose for change, create your vision, take stock of current reality, choose support, identify strategies for time management, take effective action, and then go deeper. So it's basically this refinement process of staying on track, getting in the right direction. A lot of parallels with like agile development, really an iterative approach, which I've been a big advocate for in terms of productivity. We might not have a lot of time to dig too deep into some of this. This article in Fast Company is actually an excerpt from Greg McKeown's book, Effortless, which is the sequel to his book, Essentialism. Yeah, you definitely do see cycles in nature. There's a lot of cycles that we tend to see. I think with the broad adoption of kind of Greek thought, so Santiago, are you chatting about me doing in a reading section, or are you talking about that article in particular? I would love your feedback. If there's a different way I could do this that's more helpful for you, definitely open to making changes here. Civilization. I've tried it before. I'm not much of a gamer myself, but I've been intrigued by the game here and there. I think I've I've played, I think, the free Civ version, the open source version of it a couple times, but I'm not, like I said, I can't do much for games. It's kind of a mental time suck for me, unfortunately. But this is an interesting point here, where he's talking about, I should zoom in so everybody can see a little bit more easily. About irritations. This is something I've struggled with myself, is that I pretty much work through irritations very easily, and it's challenging. Because then I tend to forget problems that we have, or that I have, and then I don't really try to fix them. It's just easier to kind of navigate through it. But one thing that I've been thinking over the last couple of years is that when we take time to analyze problems and solve them, they become a lot easier to solve. And so I've been trying to take more time to think through realistic problems that I have. So he breaks this down into, what's a problem that irritates me repeatedly? What's the total cost of managing that over several months or years? And what is the next step I can take immediately in a few minutes to move toward solving it? That makes a lot of sense. Do I like history? How do you think about the application of these themes in historiography? Do you know Calibe? I don't know that name. Would be interested in learning more, though. I do like history. To be honest, though, I haven't spent a lot of time digging into history in relation to this. So that's actually a really interesting angle. It would be really, I think it'd be interesting to take a look at some of this stuff from a historical perspective. I know that some of my favorite classes in school were relating to like deep dives into history. Why did countries do things the way that they did? What started, say like World War I, or and the things leading up to that, like years and years and years prior, that kind of seeded the bed for when things like that happened. I love thinking about those kinds of things. I just haven't dug into it too much deeply. If you have any recommended resources, I would love to do a dive into that at some point. This point here is also interesting. Oh yeah, Mike, I didn't actually state it here. Sorry about that. I'm using the Readwise highlighter extension for Chrome, which is super cool because then this puts all of these highlights into Readwise. I have a link in the description. It is an affiliate link, but if you're interested in trying Readwise, it's readwise.io/Justin. If you want to try it there, you get an extended trial, 60 days instead of 30 for it, if you haven't used it before. But that's what I'm using. So the cool thing about the way this works then is when I highlight it on the page, I can click on it and add notes here. I can tag it as well. And then it syncs automatically into my Obsidian vault. Or if you use something like Roam or Notion, it can sync into there as well. It's absolutely been a game changer for me when it comes to knowledge management and surfacing interesting ideas. Yeah, so recommend checking it out if you haven't taken a look at it yet. If you would like to, you're not obligated to. If you want to use the affiliate link that I have in the description, feel free to do so. Otherwise, it's no big deal if you don't. I just really love the software, so I think it's been so amazing to use. Aria says, we love stories. I guess that's why history is so interesting. Do you think we can leverage storytelling to be more productive? Yes, I do. The other side of my work life right now is in marketing. And one thing that I've learned a lot about marketing is it's about story. And story oftentimes is related to the stories that resonate with us and motivate us to do something are stories that resonate with something inside of us, something that we desire, something that we enjoy, something that we want to avoid, things like that. And so I think if we can tell the story to ourselves that resonates with us about productivity, of being productive, I think that really would help. But it's also the story that we tell other people about productivity. You know, I think part of the reason productivity has caught on has been really fascinating because I see the connection between marketing or between the marketing of it and how people grab onto it. So often productivity has been marketed as, if you just do these 10 steps, then you'll be successful. And I mean, people genuinely want success. They want to advance in their careers. They want money. And I get that. That's not a motivator for me personally. And I don't think that's a healthy motivator or a very sustainable motivator long term. And so, but I think there is something to marketing. I mean, Seth Godin would say that marketing is really about making change in the world. So it's not about trying to hawk stuff to people or sell stuff to people, but it's about genuinely trying to help people and make change in the world. Many problems that we face where people aren't thinking about things correctly or aren't thinking or seeing things the way that we see them, it's a storytelling problem. It's a marketing problem. And so to be more productive ourselves, I think that can relate to storytelling. What story are we telling ourselves about the work that we're doing? And can we change that story? Because sometimes the story that we believe isn't necessarily the story that's true. For example, a lot of people believe that, you know, if I just work hard enough, and get to this certain point of success, then I'll have everything that I need and I'll be happy. But oftentimes that story, one, doesn't play out, and two, if it does play out, it doesn't deliver. And so there's a lot of this story that we tell ourselves that motivates us in the wrong way, in the wrong direction. And so if we correct those stories that we tell ourselves, then we become truly more productive because we're investing in the things that matter the most. So if we're motivated just by success and money, we might forsake other things like relationships or family in our lives. And that might end us up in a spot 50 years down the road where we have regrets. But if we tell ourselves that what's most productive to me is investing in my family, providing for my family, loving them well and being with them, then the time that I have, I will try to invest as well as I possibly can to do that. Santiago says, marketing is very interesting. Have you integrated this topic with your work? Not really. I've seen some parallels there, but it's one of those that I'm trying to figure out if there is a tie. I do think there is an element of productivity that as a solo marketer in a company, you need to have the ability to decide at a strategic level what's the most important and then execute it on it effectively in order to maximize the amount of impact that you have for marketing. So you can do a lot of things that don't scale, but then when you do need to scale it, how do you scale it? So that's always like in the back of my mind too, is like, how do I execute on the most important thing? How do I execute on it in the most effective way? And then how do I do the most important thing in a way that actually scales? Yeah, so I think I can share some of that thoughts. I do record these live streams so that I can share them as videos, just kind of clip it, post it, which is kind of fun. With some of the rebranding that I'm doing, I've got to figure out where I'm going to post some of these things, just because I might start a second channel or something like that that's for more broad productivity related things and discussions, and then keep this one for PKM in particular, just because the broader productivity stuff hasn't resonated as well on this channel when I've tried it recently. But I know there's a lot of people that are interested in that stuff out there, so it's just a matter of finding the right audience for it. But yeah, well, I know I kind of didn't quite get through the list of articles today, but I really appreciated the conversation. So I appreciate everybody hanging around and chatting. Aria, Santiago, thanks so much for your contributions. Mike, thanks for the questions. I've really enjoyed having you all on the stream today, and I do need to get a couple other things done for the end of the day, so I'm going to wrap up the stream here in just a minute. But again, I appreciate you joining in. I probably have time for one more question if somebody has one, but again, if you're tuning in from Twitter or on LinkedIn, do leave a comment there if you have something that you'd like to say. Otherwise, glad to have you here, and I will be doing this again probably, I think, next week. Yeah, next week I'm around, and I'll be doing this, like, we try to do this at 1 p.m. Central Time every Thursday for Think With Me Thursday. But yeah, I'm going to sign off, but thanks again so much for the insightful conversation today, digging into these concepts of productivity and time management. I think it was pretty fun to have these conversations with y'all. So take care, signing off, and I'll